In some ways, I don't envy the authors of this series. Writing a prequel is hard, especially one that has all the major plot points well known. Dark Crystal encountered the same problem in the Netflix series. When you know how the ending must happen, it becomes a problem, and especially when the ending is a tragedy. I can say that Episode 1 was a partial success. First, there's an issue with elves. You have two main types of elves. On one hand, you have Witcher elves. These are just pointy-eared human minority living in Poland. They may be magic or even long-lived, but they are mortal, and they are fundamentally human. On the other hand, you have the Tolkien demi-angel elves, who literally live in physical heaven. This series obviously is based off the latter, but you fairly routinely get characterization that is more in line with the former. Most notably, the discussion of time acts like evil can die, when all of the characters of import are immortal. They know Sauron is the strongest of the Maiar. Why do they think he would ever give up or fade away? Getting into specifics, a lot of the issues I have is how much they are diverging from the source material. I am reminded of one point in the Fellowship of the Ring commentary. Jackson said his greatest worry wasn't any of the battles. It was the Council of Elrond. Getting all the history, background, and exposition out of the way. In the end, they succeeded by telling as little of the story as they could get away with, and implying that there's a lot more story out there. However, there's a stark difference between glossing over things that are unimportant and just flat out lying. The montage of the Silmarillion was just horrific. They ignored the entire kinslaying of the Teleri, the Oath of Fëanor, the other kinslayings, the exile of the Noldor, Eärendil, and essentially the entire book. The entire point of the Silmarillion was that to go to war against evil itself is impossible, that mortals cannot triumph without God, that an oath made in earnest for the best of reasons might turn against you. In the end, Elrond's parents, Eärendil and Elwing, sailed to heaven, begged the archangels to help, and it was the Maiar and the loyal High Elves from Valinor who defeated Morgoth. This theme is just ignored in the show. Then, there's a running theme in Tolkien's work about being wary of being enraptured by convincing people. Sauron took on the name Anatar, the giver of gifts, and he did legitimately teach many things to the elves, including ring-making. However, he also sowed discord. He convinced Númenor to rebel against heaven, causing the not Atlantis to be washed in the sea. And, of course, he created the One Ring. Here, the idea that they are still hunting Sauron and refusing to let go of the concern about his threat ignores the main theme. Sauron was a cautionary tale about believing in people with flowery language. While Tolkien claimed to hate allegory, the similarity to both the Morning Star and a certain extremely evil human cannot be ignored. Having it be a more straightforward war story just doesn't jive with the central plot, where Sauron tricks the elves into forging the rings that will let him rule everything. Secondly, the dialogue in the show is a bit inconsistent. It's not Tolkien eloquence or Jackson pragmatism, but a mishmash in the middle. Some scenes feel like standard discussion, with the occasional Tolkien-esque line as a quip. On the other hand, there were some scenes that they nailed. Galadriel and Elrond's argument is actually amazing. While the quotations in the trailer seem cringy and pedantic, when you have everything in context, you have a man telling his mother-in-law to retire as she refuses to let go of her duties. This brings me to another point. One criticism that's kinda justified is that Galadriel is literally Elrond's mother-in-law, and yet they talk more like lovers. This is partially justified because they aren't related yet. According to lore, Celebrian was born about year 300 of the Second Age, which is about the time the show occurs. However, Galadriel married Celeborn early in the First Age, so she should be a married woman now. However, the show implies that she's still single, which probably means that there will be a love story with Celeborn sometime during the run. I'm not terribly fond of this, as it seems to border on wife husbandry for Elrond. While in the original, they met when Celebrian was about 1,000 and Elrond was 1,300, and they married early in the Third Age. However, I can see bringing Galadriel's story forward so you have more character growth during the show itself, instead of, before and after. And now, the Oliphant in the room. We need to talk about Galadriel. I know you want to have a familiar character as the protagonist of a show in this universe, but this is completely different characterization of the woman. Yes, she is 5,000 years younger than when we previously saw her, but this brash and angry young woman is unrecognizable. Additionally, no one questions her being a military commander at all. When she's elven nobility, and elven women did not fight in Tolkien's armies, she should be in court handling logistics of armies, not leading a company through the north. Overall, it almost reads like the part was written for a man, then gender flipped in name but not character. In fact, if you had flipped the roles of Elrond and Galadriel, parts of this story would have worked better, with a young brash warrior being counseled by the older, wiser queen. It's so much that I suspect the first draft of this script actually had Elrond in those opening scenes, not Galadriel. Though, I will defend the criticisms about the fight with the troll. Yes, her actions put Legolas to shame and would be silly in most other setups. But, as Noldorian nobility, Galadriel is explicitly a lot more powerful than the Sindarin prince. She was trained in Valinor and has had a millennium of practice to allow her to pull off crazy moves like that. It's out of place for the Galadriel we know, but it does fit for the Galadriel that has been created for this show. Finally, I have some weird concerns that I hope they don't go too far on. There is a throwaway line in Elrond's introduction that implies that Elrond is being discriminated against. Elf lords only? Elrond is not only direct descendant of 2 royal lines, and his parents literally saved Middle-earth and were turned into a star for their service, but Elrond is 1/16th angel. There is a reason he sits at the right hand of the High King. This isn't a young Spock getting bullied situation. This statement would be somewhere between treason and heresy. Secondly, the Harfoots are treated more like pixies or borrowers than hobbits. If anything, they are too small, and are shown breaking into a garden like Peter Rabbit and hiding from outsiders. They just don't fit, even with the existing Hobbit lore. And neither of these 2 changes bode well, because they are just so out of place with the existing lore. On the other hand, there were a few things that this show did well. Specifically, the scene of Arondir in the human tavern does show the natural interspecies tensions that would arise between elves and humans. The oppressed humans are angry or subservient, while showing that the elder elf is wise enough to avoid unnecessary conflict. It's clear that neither species approve of him falling in love with a human woman, and the fates of Luthien, Beren, Tuor, and Idril are alluded to. Despite this almost being a Witcher-style storyline, I feel it's also very appropriate in this universe. Ismael Cordova strikes the perfect balance for a conflicted elf in a difficult emotional situation, while still feeling like an elf. The subtle emotion with the detachment makes him, in many ways, the best actor in the first episode. So overall, my conclusion is that it's not as bad as I had feared. There are good points. However, I am almost offended at how the lore has been handled so far. That complete lack of respect for the history that is older than any of the people writing this darn thing does not bode well for the remainder of this series. So now, all we can do is wait and see.
Nemare, my friends. Tenet in the Lumiere.